South Africa's decision represents another low point in the continent's relations with the ICC. Most African nations signed up to the court, but in recent years, several have been questioning its agenda. CCTV's Clementine Logan has more.
The African Union has led the charge against the ICC. It's long accused the court of bias and racism and now wants its entire membership to withdraw. Kenya is also a big critic, particularly after the ICC's attempt to put President Uhuru Kenyatta on trial. Kenyatta says the ICC is a vehicle that strayed off course to the detriment of our sovereignty, security and dignity as Africans. Ethiopia's Prime Minister Haile Mariam Desalegn says the ICC serves Western interests and that the court is not the place for justice. Other critics include Zimbabwe's President Robert Mugabe and Uganda's leader Yoweri Museveni, who used his own inauguration earlier this year to brand the court a bunch of useless people. The court still has some supporters on the continent, among them Botswana, but South Africa's announcement is going to be encouraging to those determined to sever ties with The Hague. Back to you.
Thank you, Clem. Let's get you some perspective on that story now. I'm joined live from our Johannesburg studios by Alan Gary. He's a senior researcher at the Institute for Security Studies. Alan, thank you for joining us on Africa Live. Now, what's your take on South Africa's announcement it will be withdrawing from the ICC?
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me. And let me just say it at the outset that this decision by the South African executive is ill-advised, and even worse, that it is regressive of any state that wishes to fight against impunity for international crimes. The import of this withdrawal will obviously deal a great blow to the victims of international crimes, not only in South Africa, but in the rest of the continent.
Well, every case currently at the ICC was brought there by African countries, but there's this argument that the ICC is biased towards Africa. Is there an argument, is it a valid argument, and why?
Well, I think we need to correct that narrative. It's a misconception. There are three ways in which cases appear before the International Criminal Court. The first one is through referrals by states parties themselves. The second is through an initiation by the prosecutor of the court. And finally, a referral by the Security Council of the United Nations. There are 9 active situations before the court right now. Yes, they're all African situations. But of all those situations, only one relates to an initiative by the prosecutor, and that's the Kenyan situation. The Security Council initiated 2 situations, that's Darfur and Libya. The remainder 6 are instituted by states parties themselves. So Uganda, the DRC, the Central African Republic has 2 situations, Mali and Cote d'Ivoire. All those are states themselves that have asked the International Criminal Court to intervene. So it's not entirely correct that Africa is being targeted by the International Criminal Court, but rather we feel that it is African perpetrators of international crimes that are being targeted for the benefit of African victims of international crimes.
So now South Africa, it has a strong judicial system. It has the capacity to try any potential internal cases of war crimes and crimes against humanity, but this is not the case in several other African nations. So what precedent is being set here for the continent?
That's a very important point to note, that in Africa, very few African states have the capacity to investigate, to prosecute, and to try international crimes. The reason for this is that there aren't enough laws or sufficient laws to enable these mechanisms in African states to function. South Africa is not excluded from this. In fact, the legislation that allows South African criminal justice system to investigate, prosecute, and adjudicate is currently under threat as a result of this withdrawal process of being repealed, as was stated this morning by the Justice Minister Masuta. So the bottom line of this is that if withdrawal happens, then we are creating an impunity gap in the continent. We are allowing African victims not to have recourse to justice, and this is really a travesty, particularly coming from South Africa, a country that has a long-standing relationship with democratic ideals and the fight for human rights for all people.
Great insights there, Alan Ngari in Johannesburg. Thank you for joining us.